Hello everyone, I have a small request. If you've been enjoying my videos, please subscribe to my new channel. From now on, I will no longer upload new videos here. All future videos will be uploaded on my new channel. You'll find the link in the description and pinned comment. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much. If you want it shorter and punchier, hi everyone, important update. This channel will no longer have new uploads. From now on, all my new videos will be posted on my new channel. If you'd like to keep watching, please subscribe via the link in the description or pinned comment. Thank you for your support. I have spent 19 years reconciling numbers that didn't want to be reconciled, and I can tell you the exact moment a company decides you're expendable. It's the moment they schedule the meeting for 8 a.m. before anyone else is in the building, and they don't offer you coffee. 5 days after I buried my wife, my stepson had security walk me out of the office I helped build, holding a banker's box he didn't offer to carry. This isn't a story about grief, although there was plenty of that. It's a story about a document nobody else remembered existed, and what happens when the person everyone underestimated turns out to be the one who filed it. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts, and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe, because this one has a paper trail you are not going to believe. I'm a forensic accountant. Have been for 19 years. People think that means I chase embezzlers in movies, but mostly it means I read what other people write when they think no one is checking. Contracts. Ledgers. The fine print at the bottom of page 14 that everyone signs without reading. I don't get surprised by documents. I get surprised by people. That's the part of the job nobody warns you about. The numbers never lie to you, but the people attached to them do, constantly, cheerfully, and often to your face. I met Diane when I was 31, auditing the family business she'd built from a single hardware store into a regional supply chain company with 14 locations. She was 11 years older than me, twice widowed in the sense that her first husband had died and her second marriage, to a man named Grant, had died a slower death that ended in a settlement she never talked about. She had one son from that second marriage, Bradley. He was 19 when I met her, 24 when we married, 38 the week she died. Diane ran her company the way I ran a ledger. Everything had a reason, and if you couldn't explain the reason, you didn't get to keep the line item. She built the company with cash discipline and a founder's stubbornness, and she built our marriage the same way, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of steadiness that never made for a good anecdote at a party, but made for 22 years of a life I didn't have to brace myself for. I never took a salary from the company those first 8 years. I worked as their outside auditor, then their controller, then, at Diane's insistence, their chief financial officer, a title Bradley's father-in-law once called generous, in front of the whole executive team, like I hadn't spent 2 decades finding the money other people lost. Here is the arithmetic the family ran on me, and I didn't do the math on it until it was too late. I was the one who showed up for the 6 a.m. inventory audits. I was the one who sat with Diane through 11 rounds of chemo, 3 of which Bradley missed for work. I was the one who quietly restructured the company's debt in 2019 and saved it from a covenant default that would have cost them the business. And I was, according to the org chart Bradley had printed and laminated for his office wall, executive leadership, non-family. Diane died on a Tuesday in March, at 4:47 in the morning, in a hospital bed we'd moved into our living room so she could see the garden. I was holding her hand. Bradley was not there. He arrived 4 hours later, in a suit, having apparently stopped to change first. I want to be precise about what happened next, because precision is the only thing that has ever protected me. On the Thursday after the funeral, 2 days later, Bradley called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, which was unusual, since I'd sat on that board for 11 years as Diane's proxy. I found out about the meeting from the calendar invite that auto-forwarded to my assistant, a woman named Carol who had worked for the company longer than Bradley had been alive and who, I would later learn, had already started keeping her own file. At that meeting, Bradley was named CEO. Not interim CEO. CEO. The board minutes, which I obtained later through channels I'll explain, record that Bradley told the board, quote, "My mother would have wanted continuity, and continuity means keeping this in the family, in practice as well as name." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, because it's going to matter later. In practice as well as name. On Friday, Bradley called me. Not into his office, Diane's office, which he'd already moved into, though her nameplate was still on the door. He told me the company was going in a leaner direction. He told me my role would be restructured. He told me, and I wrote this down within the hour because writing things down is what I do, that it's not personal. It's just, you were always more moms higher than the companies. On the following Wednesday, 5 days after the funeral, I arrived at my office to find my badge deactivated at the front door. Security escorted me to my desk to collect personal items, gave me exactly 11 minutes, and walked me to my car. Carol stood by the elevator the entire time, saying nothing, holding a coffee she never drank, which I would later understand was not indifference. It was a woman documenting a crime scene with her eyes because she didn't yet know if she was allowed to help. I sat in my car in the parking lot I'd walked into for 11 years, and I did the thing I always do when the ground moves. I opened my phone, and I took a screenshot of the termination letter. Then I forwarded Bradley's Friday text. It's not personal, it's just, to my own email, timestamped, with a subject line that just said, March 22nd, 9:14 a.m. I didn't cry in that parking lot. I looked at the screenshot until the numbers in my head stopped shaking, and then I drove home and opened the safe deposit box key that had been sitting in my desk drawer for 6 years, a key Diane had given me in an envelope on our 15th anniversary with a note that said, in her handwriting, "For when you need it. You'll know when." I hadn't opened that box in 6 years. I opened it that night. Inside was a document I had reviewed once, in draft, back in 2013, and had genuinely forgotten existed. A shareholder voting trust agreement, executed and notarized, naming me as trustee of 49% of Diane's founder shares, not Bradley, not the estate's executor me, with instructions that the trust would only convert to a standard bequest if I voluntarily resigned my position at the company or declined the trusteeship in writing. I had not resigned. I had been fired. Those are not the same word, and Diane, who read contracts the way I do, had made absolutely sure of that. I sat at my kitchen table with that document until 11 at night, and I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, because I needed to be sure I wasn't hoping it said something it didn't. Forensic accountants don't get to be hopeful. We get to be right. There was a second document in the box, smaller, folded twice, a personal letter from Diane, dated the same week as the trust, for years before she got sick. It wasn't dramatic. It was 1 paragraph. The line I kept returning to was this: Bradley loves the idea of the company more than he has ever loved doing the work of it, and I think one day he'll try to prove he doesn't need you to run it. When that day comes, don't argue with him. Just make sure he knows what he's actually inherited. She'd known. Years before either of us imagined she'd be gone this soon. She'd known. And she'd built a document for it the way you'd build a levee for a flood that hadn't come yet. I didn't call Bradley. I didn't call the board. I made 1 phone call, to the estate attorney who had drafted that trust with Diane, a man named Everett Choi who had known me for a decade, and who said, when I explained what had happened, "Well, I suppose we should discuss what 49% of the vote actually controls in that bylaw structure." Then he asked me to come in Monday morning with the original notarized copy. I did not act yet. I filed the copy back in the box. I went to the funeral reception for Diane's extended family that Sunday, the one Bradley had scheduled 2 weeks late because of logistics, still not knowing what I knew. The pressure started almost immediately. Bradley's wife, Simone, called me on Thursday, the same week I'd been fired, to ask, with what she clearly believed was warmth, whether I'd be comfortable signing a quitclaim on the house, since it was really always meant to pass to Bradley eventually, being the family home. I told her the house was in my name alone, purchased with my income, and she laughed a small laugh and said, "Well, it's all family money at the end of the day, isn't it?" Bradley's cousin Wyatt, who worked in the warehouse division and had always treated me like furniture, stopped by my house unannounced the following Tuesday. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a folder of transition documents for me to sign, releasing any claim to unvested company interests, and he sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where the trust document now lived in a drawer 8 feet from his elbow, and told me, "Bradley's just trying to protect what his mom built. You get that, right?" He would have wanted it clean. I asked him one question. I said, "Who told you I have unvested interests to release?" Wyatt didn't have an answer. He left the folder on my counter and let himself out. That night, I called Everett and said 4 words, "Send the letters." If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon for someone suddenly find all the time in the world the moment money is involved, you already know exactly where this is going. Stick with me, because the letters were just the opening move. 2 weeks later, Bradley organized what he called a family gathering at the house Diane and I had shared. His idea, his choice of venue, which told me more than anything he said in the invitation. He framed it as a memorial toast for his mother, 6 weeks after her death, but I'd worked in that family long enough to recognize a summons dressed as a eulogy. I brought a folder. Manila, unremarkable, the kind you'd never look at twice. Inside it was everything. The trust, the letter, the board minutes, Bradley's own text message, time-stamped, and a document Everett had pulled 3 days earlier that Bradley didn't yet know existed. A shareholder consent form Bradley had already begun circulating to the board for a vote on a merger, a vote that legally required my sign-off as trustee of 49%, a vote he was about to hold without me. The gathering was in the living room where Diane had died. 20-some family members, wine poured, a slideshow of photographs on a loop nobody was watching. Bradley stood by the fireplace and gave a toast. He talked about honoring his mother's legacy by building something even bigger. He said, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it down in the car afterward, "Some people helped build this company, but it was always going to come back to family." Then he raised his glass to me, specifically, and said, "And to everyone who understood when it was time to step back gracefully." A few people clapped. Simone smiled at me the way you smile at someone you've already filed away as handled. I asked for the floor. Bradley gave it to me. Generously, I could see it in his face, the way you give the floor to someone you believe is about to concede. I opened the folder. I started with the board minutes. I read, without raising my voice, the sentence Bradley had said to the board about continuity, in practice as well as name, and I asked the room to note the date, 2 days after his mother's funeral, 1 day after I'd sat with her while she died and he hadn't. I laid down the termination letter next to Diane's trust document, side by side on the coffee table, and I said, "This letter fires me from a job. This document, executed 6 years before either, makes clear I cannot be removed from the trusteeship of 49% of this company's shares by being fired from a job. Those are 2 different instruments. Someone should have checked which one controlled before scheduling a merger vote." The room went soft first, a kind of confused murmur, Simone's smile faltering. Then it went emotional, Bradley's aunt saying, "Diane wouldn't have wanted this, fighting, at a memorial." I said, quietly, "Diane wrote this letter for exactly this evening. I didn't write the script. She did." Then it went loud. Bradley said I'd manipulated his mother in her final years, which is when I placed the letter, the personal one, in Diane's own handwriting, on top of the pile, and read one line aloud. Bradley loves the idea of the company more than he has ever loved doing the work of it. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. His mother's handwriting did the work. Then it went quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet, the kind that happens when a room finally does the math. Wyatt stood up and left without a word. Simone's face did something complicated. Bradley said nothing at all, which for a man who always had something to say, was its own confession. One person in that room had a conscience moment worth naming. Carol, my old assistant, who had come as a guest of the family's longtime office manager. She stood by the door the entire time, and at the end, she caught my eye and gave one small nod. It didn't undo the 11 minutes she'd stood silent by that elevator. It wasn't supposed to, but it was the only honest thing anyone in that room offered me that night, and I noted it, the way I note everything. I closed the folder. I said one sentence before I left. I didn't come here tonight to take anything from this family. I came to make sure everyone finally understood what they'd actually inherited. Then I picked up my coat and walked out the same door Diane's ambulance had gone through 6 weeks earlier. Here is how it resolved, in plain numbers, because that's the only way I know how to close a ledger. The merger Bradley tried to push through without my consent was legally void from the moment he attempted the vote. Everett filed to formalize my trusteeship with the state within the week. Under the terms Diane had written, my 49%, combined with the 11% held by 2 long-tenured executives who voted with me once they saw the documents, gave me effective control of the board. Bradley remained a shareholder. He did not remain CEO. The board voted him out 14 weeks after that gathering, with a severance package considerably smaller than the one he declined to offer me. Simone and Bradley divorced 8 months later. I have no comment on that beyond the fact that entitlement is rarely a foundation 2 people can stand on once the money underneath it changes shape. Wyatt was let go from the warehouse division in the same restructuring that followed, not out of spite, but because an internal review, the kind I know how to run, found he'd been approving vendor contracts with a company his brother-in-law owned. Carol was promoted to director of operations. She still keeps a file on everything. I taught her that. The house stayed in my name. It always had been. The banker's box Bradley had let me carry out of the building 5 days after my wife's funeral sits in my study now, next to a second box, the one holding the trust document and Diane's letter, which I had framed, just the one line, and hung where I can see it from my desk. I don't think of what happened as revenge, and I want to be honest with you about why. Revenge is something you go looking for. This was something I simply stopped funding. I had spent 2 decades absorbing costs that were never mine to carry, the missed audits Bradley didn't do, the confrontations Diane didn't want to have, the family's quiet assumption that showing up counted for less than sharing blood. I didn't destroy anything that belonged to that family. I just stopped paying for a debt I never agreed to. With my share of the company's earnings that year, I did the thing Diane would have actually wanted, the thing that had nothing to do with anyone who'd wronged me. I funded a scholarship in her name at the community college where she'd taken night classes before she ever owned a single hardware store, for women studying accounting and finance who were the first in their families to run the numbers instead of just living inside someone else's. People like to say the truth always comes out. It doesn't, not on its own. Someone has to file it, date it, and keep it somewhere safe until the day it's needed. My wife knew that better than anyone I've ever met, and she made sure that when her family tried to rewrite what she'd built, there would be a version of the story that couldn't be edited, because it was notarized. If this reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts, and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.